Ogre know that Trotsky f***ing suck, but Ogre also know that people who suck can sometimes say very smart thing. Ogre not f***ing liberal, okay? Now we're moving to cut philosophy. Why the middle classes support fascism? Do they? Do they not? Does the middle class exist? I have made a whole video on why I believe the middle class does not exist from the perspective of material analysis. It's not actually a real thing, but just like race is a social construct that if enough people believe in it actually becomes real, so does the middle class, specifically in the United States and certain Western European countries. The middle class, while having been originally introduced as a mechanism through which to divide the working classes, both those less financially privileged and a little bit less financially privileged, it has existed, in the bodies and souls of Western ideology for so long, it has kind of become a thing. Middle class identity has become a thing. A so-called way of middle class life that needs to be protected has become a thing. In essence, socially, again, not materially, has become a thing. That is why it needs to be dissected, analyzed, and talked about the way Kak philosophy is now going to do. I just want you to always remember that as an economic class, it does not exist, but as a social construct in which enough people believe in those particular cultures and states, it absolutely does. And as such, it can be both manipulated by reactionary forces, or when done properly, it can be used by socialists as well. By socialists, it can be used in numerous ways, either by completely denying its existence and giving a little bit of class consciousness to people who define themselves as middle class, which I believe is the more proper approach, or for others, a little bit more populism, where you are actually, quote unquote, talking to the middle class, well, just basically lying to them from the prism of thinking that they actually exist, right? That's propaganda 101. Being middle class is having the ability to push auto pay on your bills and spending your life servicing debt. Exactly. In the same way that blackness does not exist, but it does now because of history. Exactly. And half of the fucking concepts we have, that some of them are reactionary, some are not. Society is basically a bunch of things that everybody agreed upon as real things, is real, but is real is not real. And then we just go with it. We just go with it. So Germany, Adolf Hitler is coming into power. Why did the people that define themselves as middle class support him so fervently? Or did they at all? Our friend Kak Philosophy will try to explain. Let's get right into this bitch.
The Germans voted for the Nazis. This is, of course, true, but it's not very politically enlightening. It might lead people to think that support for the Nazis among Germans was near unanimous. Even in 1933, after voter manipulation and severe repression against left-wing voters, the Nazis received less than half of the votes. This is not to deny, of course, that the Nazis received a terrifying amount of support at their peak.
They got to control so much of the government because the Social Democrats completely betrayed the revolutionary ideals of solidarity between working classes of all nations, because they were one of the first ones to define revolution as de facto authoritarian and anti-democratic. They switched gears in support for the German bourgeois Weimar Republic in order to save their extremely privileged positions in government at the time, which led to them very often collaborating with even fascist elements, burgeoning fascist elements of Germany again at that time. That was kind of the split. Before that, all of socialists called themselves social democrat, socialist, social democrat. That was basically interchangeable terminology. But at that point, they have differentiated themselves from revolutionary socialism by quite literally saying, we don't believe in revolution, period. Ironically, during that time, I'm not saying it's always the case, but they have given us historical precedents exactly during that time when, push came to shove, and push will always eventually come to shove. What side will social democrats kind of go into? Will they care about a worker state, a socialist state more, or will they care about their ideal of achieving more worker rights without violence? When it comes to the case of Germany, they very much so decided what? They decided that they care about the stability of the German state more than they did about class consciousness and working class rights. That is kind of the historical distancing between socialist movements, which always de facto have to be revolutionary, and social democratic movements. Does this mean that all social democratic movements of the future would not choose the other side and kind of abandon their principles of anti-revolution? No, in my opinion, not that much. But here we are materialists, and we look at history, and we look at what happened, and we look at where certain ideologies tend to go. And with Socdems, unfortunately, it always went towards betrayal of revolution in the name of so-called peacekeeping. They were additionally hypocritical, though, when it comes to their rhetoric about peacekeeping, because these were the same guys that were in power to an extent at the start of World War I. They very much so stood with great fervor in support of Germany, which was arguably who provoked World War I, right? In the name, again, of national identity and through the abandonment of the international working class. Why do I mention that aspect as well? Because it really shows us the massive hypocrisy behind saying, oh, we're against violence, that's why we're against revolution. Motherfuckers, you literally supported your country's participation in the bloodiest conflict in history up until that time. They're not afraid of blood, they're just afraid of losing their positions in power. That's it. Great simplified historical context, Hugo. Thank you very much. Hope I didn't simplify it too much. The SPD really let the whole world down and sabotage socialism for a generation, yeah. Some people like to joke around, but only in closed socialist circles, because otherwise you're going to sound insane, or actually, give reactionaries argumentation. But socialists kind of did end up killing 100 million. And by socialists, I mean social democrats of Germany, because they did not support the revolutionary fervor of the German working class. They directly paved way to Nazi Germany that ended up killing close to more than 100 million people. So, yeah, one of the greatest L's of all time, arguably. Freikorpsblatt. Yeah, exactly. It was the Social Democratic Party of Germany, which quite literally called for the murder of two of the leaders of the communist revolutionary movement in Germany, one of which you should all know was Rosa Luxemburg, right?
It is well known, for instance, that the Nazis came to receive support from Germany's leading industrialists and various military officials, but that's a very small percentage of the population. As a modern political party, it also needed a more numerous electorate.
I guess I'm going to spin it. Communists did not cause 100 gorillion deaths, but ironically, Socdems did cause 100 gorillion deaths. Oh, the stake of my month, dude. I hope that gets clipped and shoved up Socdems' asses, okay? Again, doesn't mean that all Socdem parties will do this in the future, but Jesus Christ, prove me wrong first and then I'll believe you.
The political parties of the Weimar Republic tended to represent relatively coherent social groups, but the Nazi Party was quite varied, with the Nazis acting as a kind of catch-all party of reactionary protest against the Weimar Republic and everything it represented. It drew its votes from sections of civil servants, Protestants, white-collar employees, rural residents, soldiers, and others. But despite this variety, there was one social group that, above all others, served as the Nazi Party's main support base from its inception to its seizing of power.
iPhone, no. Flippy phone. It does the flip. It does the flip. Look, it does the flip. Holy shit.
And that is the lower
I
middle
love
class.
gimmicks, I'm sorry.
By which I mean not
Capitalism
simply
has
middle
gone into
income
my soul.
earners, but economic positions such as those of small business owners, the self-employed, shopkeepers, merchants, and in rural areas, land-owning farmers. In other words, what is often referred to as the petty bourgeoisie. And the Nazi Party knew this, and explicitly addressed itself to them. It called for the revitalization of the middle class, presented themselves as its protectors, and attacked the other parties for failing the middle class.
Exactly. It harped on the new socially defined differentiation between the so-called proletariat and the so-called middle class. It took a whole fucking chunk of working class people and they called them something else, immediately killing their class consciousness, right?
Commerce to the liberals and Marxists. It played into the middle class's fears of being pushed into the ranks of mere workers.
Which most of them, except the petit bourgeois, already were.
Advice can seem hopelessly contradictory.
Yeah, Kamala, yeah, exactly, Kubashi. Kamala really harps on this now. Small business owners, middle class, that's a whole fucking shtick.
Consider, for instance, the seemingly contradictory way in which the Nazis described the Weimar Republic. On the one hand, they attacked it from a seemingly anti-capitalist perspective.
Why my boy Hitler got no face, bro? Why my boy Hitler censored like that? I know he's fucking ugly, but come on, man. You should show Hitler so that everybody remembers that the leader of this up movement was disgusting and looked like he was melting 24/7.
On the other hand, they attacked it from an anti-Marxist perspective, saying that the country was in the hands of Marxist Jews who had no respect for property rights. This tension was the outcome
the classic property rights. What about my toothy brush?
of the middle class standpoint it represented. Consider small business owners. On the one hand, they fear big businesses, which, due to their extensive capital and scale, were able to operate more cheaply and efficiently, and thereby often pushed small businesses out of the market by outcompeting them or buying them up. This was the source of their anti-capitalist sentiments. as they saw that unregulated market forces and their tendencies towards monopolization threatened their businesses in favor of big capital. In both the capitalist and the socialist systems, they saw attempts to take away the business that they had invested so much in. And this is one of the things that made Nazi rhetoric so appealing to them. The way they saw it, big businesses were able to influence politics by means of their massive wealth.
Which again,
working
chat, you
class
should
was able
know
to
this
influence-
is extremely ironic, because if you let capitalism run long enough, and if you let capital accumulation, meaning basically power through money, accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people, what do you have more of and what do you have less of? You have more Walmarts and less corner shops. You have more massive corporations slowly eating up every aspect of commerce until the so-called small guy, the petit bourgeois, eventually ceases to exist. This is not an error of market economics. This is inevitable. Petit bourgeois people, siding with the great market and the great capitalists or even the fascists, are always shooting themselves in the foot, because they will eventually be completely removed from the equation. At least the communists would let those enterprises run to an extent, at least in lower stages of socialism. The only thing they would introduce is higher share of the labor value that is produced by those enterprises with their employees. Everybody who is a part of that small enterprise would get to decide how much they make based on how much labor output they actually have. So yes, the socialists will take away a big chunk of your business, but the capitalists, ironically, will eventually completely opt your business out of the economy, because it would no longer be efficient as compared to large corporations, because those large corporations have a lot more money and power to play with. So you choose. The best choice is not to be a annoying small boss, but that's a different conversation. It won't be able to compete with volume. Exactly. Gabriel, thank you for 100 bits. What do we do with small business owners? Unionize and co-opt them, federate them. In the beginning, co-opt them. Absolutely co-opt them. And ironically, if a particular segment of small business exists in a particular city, once those small businesses are turned into a unified enterprise, they most likely will be making a lot more money, because they will be streamlined amongst them. So even while the business owner will most likely not be making as much money post-revolution at first, because it will be unionized, right? Because it will be made into pretty much a wide co-op of all the fucking corner shops or whatever, eventually they will be making so much more that they will eventually make more than what they did with their one little shop as a boss. Hugo, if I grind hard enough, I'll surely be able to ditch the petite for my bourgeois position. Oh, yeah. That's the big pitch, isn't it, brother? That's the big pitch.
This sense of being threatened from both directions led to a kind of middle class paranoia so characteristic of fascist politics.
Basically, my pitch is that while communism is not in the interests of the petit bourgeois, it's less against their interests than unfiltered, unbridled market capitalism, or even worse, fascism.
This explains also the contradiction in how Nazi propaganda depicted Jewish people. On the one hand, they were described with characteristics typically associated with the rich: greedy, self-interested, and concerned only with money.
But like conversations a bit about the like petit bourgeois to an extent are a waste of our time, because in around 15 years they will not exist, at least in the imperial court. They already borderline do not exist in the US. It's all fast food chains, it's all mega supermarkets. Dude, you have chains for everything at this point. Bicycles, you have chains for bicycles. Coffee shops, you have chains for coffee shops. Everything will eventually be eaten. So the petit bourgeois, ironically, through capitalism, will most likely not even exist in imperial core states in the next decade to two. They're not relevant. Where they will be relevant, though, very unfortunately, is as they see their power waning, that little bit of power that they had, the chuds, they run their shops and shit, they will be easily motivated to join reactionary movements, because those very reactionary movements, as Kak philosophy is exemplifying, happened back in good old Germany. They will be easily recruited by the reactionaries, because the reactionaries will give them an enemy they can concentrate on and that can explain their downtrodden position in life now compared to the good old days, while obviously ignoring large capital, while ignoring big business, while ignoring that, the richer are just getting richer, and that is why your fucking business is failing, because how the You with your fucking shop with a revenue of $25,000 a month is supposed to be competing with a Walmart across the street, which has more capital than 2-3 European countries combined. Okay. I asked you about the Weimar Republic again. I might be mistaken, but did it ignore rural areas in favor of urban development? Nazis, of course, just exploited that dissatisfaction. Maybe it was more complicated than that. You mean the Social Democrats? Maybe. I don't know much about this. The one thing you need to keep in mind about Germany became a so-called nation state not through popular upheaval like France, for example, through popular bourgeois revolution, etc., etc. It just unified based on the interests of local industrialists, local mass landowners, and the military. That is what eventually brought it into a unified state, etc., etc. When the socialists were fighting against the way the country is run, they were fighting against something a bit different than, the classic bourgeoisie that slowly evolved out of anti-feudal revolution. These are super niche things. You don't need all of this. But I want to compete against the Albanian cafe across the street. How can you take this away from me? It's kebapi, not chevapi. Exactly, Romka. That is the unironic pitch they will give us. It's not Walmart across the street that is bankrupting your business. It's the Arab that opened the same type of business across the street that is bankrupting you. That is unironically going to be the pitch. And so many people are going to swallow it harder than Donald Trump swallows piss.
Now, contrary to what people might assume, the social group that was consistently least likely to vote for the Nazis were manual workers in large-scale industry, who overwhelmingly voted for the Social Democrats and the Communists. The Communist Party appealed in particular to unskilled workers, whose position in the economy was especially precarious. Of course, such workers feared economic instability just as much as the middle class did, and often felt fear and anger at the existing state of affairs, but it did not lead to the same kind of political paranoia, because unlike most of the middle class, their fear and anger were socialized. Day to day, they shared their workplaces with a large and diverse workforce with whom they were able to share their concerns, express solidarity, and most importantly, collectively organize. And it's no accident that unionized industrial workers were even less likely to vote Nazi than unorganized ones. This led to a sense of community which the atomized members of the middle class often lacked, and relied on extreme nationalist sentiments to make up for this lack. Workers in large-scale industry were less swayed by anti-Semitism, perhaps in part because they were likely to work with fellow Jewish workers in their day-to-day lives, and saw their similarities and common interests when unionizing, making demands, and going on strike.
And because they had a boss, they had a guy they had to talk to every day that did 1% of their job and made 10 times their salary. So they had the direct class enemy in front of them every day to remind them who's actually fucking them over. Well, the petit bourgeois or like the self-employed, etc., they don't have something continuously levitating over their head, so they're much easily manipulated into finding an enemy that is not the actual economic system, the hierarchy, the direct exploitation of owners versus workers.
The Nazis did attempt to appeal to workers as well. After all, that is why they call themselves a socialist workers' party, but most of the working class were not swayed by these attempts. While a section of manual workers did support the Nazis, it's significant that these were primarily workers who were unorganized or who worked in small-scale manufacture. The importance of labor organizing and combating racism was...
Sorry if that's not very material analysis of me, but fucking idiots, okay? Marx did not account for one very immaterial class. Fucking idiots. Some people, skulls are so thick, chat, no amount of exploitation or class-conscious propaganda will pass through that thickness, okay?
A study from the American Journal of Political Science showed that unionized white workers were less likely to harbor racist attitudes than non-unionized workers in similar industries. In the Weimar Republic, while the fears and worries of the industrial working class could be turned into solidarity, the fears and worries of the middle class often turned into resentment, another essential feature of the fascist mentality. This is why Trotsky wrote, and for the purposes of this video, I don't care what you think about Trotsky, whether you admire him or hate him. The fact is that he wrote one of the best early analyses of fascism.
Is it going to be the one about Hitler particles? Yes, Chad, I've actually read Trotsky. Shoot me. Please tell me it's the one about Hitler particles. It's a very base quote.
Not every exasperated petty bourgeois could have become Hitler, but a particle of Hitler is lodged in every exasperated petty bourgeois. So I hope it's clear to everyone that I don't mean to say that every middle-class person is Hitler.
You Gopnik doesn't read Eat My ass, baby. Pre-watched Eat My... I did not... you. How dare you throw these unbased claims against me, chat? How dare you throw these unbased claims against me? No, dude, you. I did not fucking pre-watch. Go yourself. Everybody go yourselves, okay? I did not pre-watch. You will believe that I pre-watched rather than I actually read books, which I understand based on how I look. Don't look like a guy who reads many books, but I actually do. Okay, go yourself. How dare you attack my person this way? How dare you attack my dignity? I will never recover from this, chat. I used to love you. Chat used to be so supportive, so loving, so understanding of my incredible base intellect. Now they just consider me a base pre-watcher.
While the Nazi Party's ideology and propaganda had a very much middle-class character, upon assuming power, it immediately threw away its ambitious promises to the middle class and prioritized the interests of German big business over everyone else. In the end, preserving the power of big capital was its historical role. Militant labor organizing was quite prominent at the time, and the wealthy feared that the economic crisis would...
Big dumb Slav reads books, big dumb Yugo reads books. Exactly. Oh, now I feel bad. No, you shouldn't. It's okay. It's okay. I'm an idiot, and it's completely understandable for you to consider me an idiot. Just imagine how dumb the other guys are. But orcs cannot read. I will let you know that my D&D orc barbarian was actually raised by a human historian, and that's why he has much higher intelligence points than most orc barbarians. And also my history in D&D, the history roll, is super high. It's higher than any of the players I play with, right?
That is why the Nazis immediately set about suppressing trade unionists, socialists, and communists, and received so much support from the wealthy for doing so.
This is you IRL. What is me IRL? Reddit. Ugh, disgusting. Everyone calls Ogre stupid, and it's true. Ogre barely even literate. Ogre finally finished reading Ulysses, but Ogre only can identify surface-level themes like religion and nationalism, and can't comprehend deeper ideas like the remorse of conscience that makes James Joyce's novel a modernist classic. Ogre so dumb, it make Ogre sad. At this rate, Ogre will never understand Finnegan's Wake. Yes, that is literally me.
With many of Germany's leading industrialists, promised them government support and the elimination of communists and trade unions, in exchange for which the industrialists immediately began raising millions of Reichsmarks for the Nazis. That's not to mention investments from American capital as well, as the Nazis collaborated with large American companies, such as General Motors and Coca-Cola.
Only thing Ogre know is that while difference is and exists between big and small capital, Ogre know that if word capital is include, it mean bad for worker Ogre. Ogre smart. Ogre want cookie now, please. Can Ogre has cookie, please?
Nazi policy actually intensified the concentration of capital, widened the gap between small and big businesses, and led many small businesses to close down. As Trotsky wrote,
Ogre know that Trotsky fucking suck, but Ogre also know that people who suck can sometimes say very smart thing. Ogre differentiate sucking of person from sucking of writing. Ogre not fucking liberal, okay?
The petty bourgeoisie, which it turned into a battering ram against the organizations of the working class and the institutions of democracy. But fascism in power is least of all the rule of the petty bourgeoisie. On the contrary, it is the most ruthless dictatorship of monopoly capital. Fascism succeeded in putting them at the service of capital. Such slogans as state control of trusts and the elimination of unearned income were thrown overboard immediately upon the assumption of power.
Exactly.
It is therefore important for opponents of fascism to address the middle classes as well. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many believed that the petty bourgeoisie as a class were a kind of throwback that would gradually disappear from history due to the growth and concentration of capital. And yet, in recent decades, the petty bourgeoisie as a class have only grown.
They've grown because there is greater access to loans. That does not make them prone to eternal growth. Banks have still not adjusted to the fact that these guys in the long term will not be able to continue existing because of how much power of large capital will grow and how it will eventually cannibalize most small business. Banks have just started giving more loans to small businesses, which has led to their growth in the last 20 to 30 years. By growth, we mean like just different units of small businesses. Show me a small business that starts without a fucking loan. They're very rare. That doesn't mean that we should not have a specific perspective or specific rhetoric towards small business when it comes to motivating them towards what goal they should join. We should agitate small business away from joining fascism, because they're not going to join your cause, that's for sure. Literally, the only good text written by Menshevik Lenin, as we say in Russia, even a stick can shoot once a year. Exactly.
Much of the middle class was on the left wing of the French Revolution, for instance, as well as many other democratic revolutions.
But those revolutions were completely in line with their particular interest. That does not make their class necessarily progressive. No class is necessarily progressive. That's the whole point of Marxism. People of different classes, when they achieve class consciousness, what do they understand? They're being fucked over. So they say, okay, we need to change the system so that we're not being fucked over, but somebody else most likely is. And that is how society evolves, where we reject the past system and introduce a new system. But then in that new system, there will be new class dichotomies, new class conflicts. And that will be addressed, and that will be addressed, and that will be addressed until we reach a moment in which technology is developed enough in the hands of the many instead of the few, which would allow us to get rid of class in general, which is what people refer to as late-stage socialism or as communism. I love every time I say communism, it reminds me of Richard Wolff. It's normal for all classes to be fucking selfish. That's what they are. That's why they're classes, okay? It's just that usually, up until a moment of great crisis, those classes which are being screwed over usually don't develop this sort of class consciousness, and that's why they don't revolt up until a moment of great crisis, when they're like, fuck all of this shit, and it's even worth dying if I get to change this particular system. That is what is called the contradiction.
While in colonized countries, the middle classes have often sided with the anti-colonial movements. Even various labor movements developed only with the participation of sections of the middle class. Because of their in-between position, they can often be won over by either side. There are those who identify more with the bourgeoisie and resent workers for obstructing the profitability of their business, but there are also those who, due to their precarious position, identify more with the workers and support the labor struggle. In the United States, the middle class has played a central role since its very inception. America is often referred to as a nation of small businesses, and small business is a big part of American ideology, often standing in as a symbol of individual freedom and independence. Thomas Jefferson's ideal citizen was the self-sufficient and independent landowning farmer, an ideal that retained its appeal even as it soon became obsolete in the face of expanding markets.
Oh, became obsolete, just like how the small business owner will be.
All business owners and their ideals in both urban and rural areas were used as a bulwark against the spread of communism.
Social Democrats have been appealing to small businesses for a century, yet a lot of them ignore and still vote against them, of course.
To this day, small businesses play a very significant role in America's self-understanding.
One day I want to own my own business, be my own boss. Probably nothing embodies the essence of the American dream more than that thought.
Who put the fucking mannequin on my screen? Holy fuck. Somebody should call hell one of the demons escape, bro.
Small businesses are seen as personal, relatable, and admirable. In a 2017 poll, 70% of Americans said they have a great deal or a lot of confidence in small businesses. In our world, small businesses bring a lot of local color to many places and allow for products and experiences that you couldn't get anywhere else. But we shouldn't let such romanticism blind us to the many problems that small businesses often come with. They are still businesses in the end, and that means profit is their primary motive. In the United States, small businesses on average pay lower wages, provide worse benefits, are exempt from crucial labor protections, due to their small size, tend to make unionization difficult. In the US, federal law requires businesses to provide medical coverage after discharge only if they have 20 or more employees, and family and medical leave only if they have 50 or more employees.
Small businesses are so cucked. So you get a tiny profit margin as compared to a large corporation. You still have to manage and balance the needs of your employees, no matter how much you're exploiting them, but you got to balance it to the point of them not quitting. And you are also competing with massive mega corporations. The only reason why we fetishize running a small business is because of quite literally centuries almost of capitalist propaganda. That's it. It fucking sucks to run a small business. And they will be better off one day when they don't have to fucking run the whole thing, but are operating in a democratic enterprise where most likely because of their previous experience of management, they will likely be even voted in to higher positions of leadership in said unionized or general communal enterprise. Yes, good job, Noam Chomsky. The main selling point of a small business is you don't have a boss, which is literally the goal of communism.
And they will sometimes use their status as small business owners to justify overworking and underpaying people. Whether small or big, businesses compete in the same market, in which success requires ruthlessness. And to this day, the American petty bourgeoisie have a significant effect on the divisions between the political left and the right.
If you want to make America a better place for everyone, especially for minorities, forget social activism. Instead, start a business.
Wonderful.
What if we all started a business? Sir, who would work for them? What does the word business mean? You had enough capital, or in the case of small business, you got a loan, you opened it, and you get to exploit your workers to generate capital for whatever idea of a small business that you've had. A business is exploitation of workers in which you skim what they give you and instead take. If everything was a business, how the fuck would it be running? Let's talk reactionary specifically, but capitalists as well, like even liberal capitalists. They will harp on how the kids nowadays are super cucked because everybody receives like a participation trophy. Everybody receives a participation trophy. And yet it is these very same guys that want to give every person on planet Earth a participation trophy by telling them that they should run a small business. It is fucking pathetic. As a petty bourgeois working person, I can only agree. Nobody prevents you from managing shit when socialism comes. Also, with the whole planned economy thing, you don't gotta harp on bullshit marketing to sell your shit. Exactly.
Consider the Trump campaign and the MAGA movement. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to discuss whether it is fascist or not, but it is today's leading form of right-wing populism in America.
New plan. As commies, let's advocate for anarcho-capitalism so that the capitalists absorb everything into 1 to 2 huge companies, and then we do a revolt and make them into cooperatives, worldwide cooperative. I unironically joke on stream about that all the time. Like now with techno-feudalism, as titled by one of the smartest Balkan people of all time, Yanis Varoufakis. Yes, I will always say Kakis at the end. The market has grown to such an extent that it has managed to commodify itself. And now you have whole swaths of the internet, which are basically ran by corporate landlords, which tax small businesses and big businesses alike to enter the market that they've privatized, aka Amazon. You might have a small business, you might be exploiting your employees, but if you want to sell the product that you have created thanks to the exploitation of your employees, you will have to pay an additional tax to the mega corporation so that you can place your product on their big marketing / sales website. So it's already beginning, creating a super class which ironically exploits the bourgeois itself. There is a bourgeois that is so rich that is now exploiting the stolen labor value garnered by the bourgeoisie. But unfortunately, that always trickles down, but in the worst of ways, not in the best of ways, because now when a small business is being exploited by mega corporations such as Amazon, in order for them to make up for the money lost, they just cut salaries or fired their employees so that they can make the same amount of money as before, while paying off the bigger bourgeois, the bigger capitalist entity that is fucking them over.
Data from primaries in 2016, for instance, show that much of Trump's support came from middle-income voters, whose average earnings were a lot higher than those of the average American. But as a way of zooming into the class dynamics at play, I'd like to focus on the January 6th Capitol riot, as it's a particularly extreme expression of the MAGA movement. And just as we'd expect, the petty bourgeoisie, namely small business owners and the self-employed, were overrepresented among the Capitol rioters. There was a floral shop owner, a CEO of a skydiving company, owner of a chiropractor practice, owner and president of a tax guidance company, owners of real estate companies, owner of a car dealership, self-employed insurance agent, CEO of a data analytics marketing firm, and I could go on and on. This social group was much more likely to be found among the Capitol rioters than among the general voting population, and were even more overrepresented among those Capitol rioters who were violent. So it's completely misleading to see this event as a representation of the white working class, let alone the general working class. After all, the rioters came from all over the United States, which means that these were people who were well off enough and had enough economic power to take time off work, pay for traveling expenses, whether by bus or plane, as well as a hotel to stay in, just to attend a Trump rally, which is already some indication of its class character. These were people who were drawn to the MAGA movement because they identified their individual freedom with the freedom of business, and saw all government efforts to help and assist the working class and the unemployed as obstructions to their personal success.
Because owning your own business represents freedom. You are independent. You are free. And that's exactly the reason big government despises small business.
And yet, at the same time, as we saw with German fascism, this also comes with attacks on big capitalists.
I love when Democrats and Republicans fight each other only over that part of the American voting body, small businesses, and then we give the pitch that the US government doesn't care about small businesses. It's the whole fucking pitch, my dude. Because only small business owners are dumb and smart enough at the same time to harp on the continuous duopoly of American electoralism.
Conspiracy theories about the collusion of left-wing protesters and labor unions with powerful elites like George Soros. This also helps us understand America's right libertarians. Why is it that so many of them, who are supposed to be anti-government, end up moving towards fascism? Once again, the right libertarian movement is populated with a lot of petty bourgeois individuals who identify their freedom with unregulated business activity and attack the government for its obstruction of this freedom. And yet, whenever their business begins being threatened either by the demands of organized labor or simply by the ruthless tendencies of the market, they end up wishing for a strong government which would wield its iron fist in protecting their business against these threats. Among the anti-lockdown protesters, the kind who equated social distancing with communism, the petty bourgeoisie were, you guessed it, overrepresented. In Minnesota, as one example, those pleading to reopen the state during the pandemic were overwhelmingly small business owners.
That's why we call them fucking chuds here, because they are absolute fucking chuds. They are working, ironically, even long-term against the class interests of their children, because those small businesses that they plan on giving their kids will be cannibalized by larger corporations. But also we call them chuds because they're incredibly fucking stupid. If you want to find the higher concentration of idiocy, you will always, without a doubt, find it in the management office spaces of firms that have between 15 and 45 employees. And anybody who worked for such places will confirm.
The lockdown was impeding the profitability of their businesses, in some cases to the point of bankruptcy. Also, in some cases, impeding their ability to spend their disposable income.
Yeah, but the mega corporations and the banks were all bailed out and protected during COVID. They got incredible corporate social welfare. But no, these small business owners are fucking monkeys who took it out on their fellow employees or the other coffee shop being opened by Muhammad from across the street.
The fact that the lockdown was indeed threatening many small businesses incentivized the spread of various conspiracy theories, again expressing that middle-class paranoia, claiming that the virus was man-made, or that it did not exist at all, and was simply a tactic to push America towards communism. The working class also had a strong response to the pandemic, which came with an increase in worker strikes, and their demands could not be more different from those of the petty bourgeoisie. The striking workers, who were very well aware of the dangers of the pandemic and were at high risk of infection, demanded not only improved working conditions, but improved safety measures, improved access to safety equipment.
Literally, like, please, can we, like, not die? That was the request. Pulisa, not die, Pulisa. COVID literally proved who so-called essential workers are. Keyword chat. Workers. Guys who actually get everything done. The actual cogs of the actual fucking machine we call civilization.
This is not to say that some small business owners did not have legitimate concerns. The US government definitely did not act quickly and sufficiently enough to help those whose livelihoods were severely threatened by the lockdown.
Yeah, but they didn't because they were giving all the money to mega corporations. The corporation during COVID was the most cut and dry enemy, social welfare queen enemy of the petit bourgeois, of the fucking small businesses, okay? And yet they completely focused on minority issues and extremely poor and disenfranchised people who might have been or might not have been on welfare. That is why they have so many Hitlerite cells in them, as Trotsky said, okay? The second you open a small firm, you literally get a metastasis of fascist humor slowly developing in your stupid-ass brain, man.
The fact that given America's privatized healthcare system, many small business owners depend on the profitability of their business in order to pay for health insurance for themselves.
I was considered essential and I literally delivered alcohol. It was a crazy time to work. Dude, there is nothing more essential than that. I thank you for your service, brother. Small business owners can't thrive without communitarian relief and support. They are just sitting there unless they are black marketeer fronts. Exactly.
While we do see these very clear patterns in the relationship between class and politics, It is also true that today people vote according to their class a lot less than they did 100 years ago, and many of today's political divisions are drawn along lines of race, gender, and culture.
Yeah, what lack of class consciousness does to a motherfucker.
Thing that was actively and purposefully achieved by the ruling class, which has always tried to produce internal splits within the working class and to bring workers over to its side using cultural issues, a tactic which in recent decades was especially pioneered by Republicans. And this is a problem because it points to a lack of class consciousness among workers, which leads them to lash out against fellow workers rather than those who actually exploit them. This is not to say that the Democrat Party is free from blame either, as it has been consistently disappointing the poor and working class for decades, and has been thereby leaving people feeling like there is no worthwhile alternative. The decline of class consciousness has been further intensified by what I would call the petty bourgeoisification of the working class, the attempt to disarm class struggle by making workers identify more with the petty bourgeoisie than their own class.
Exactly.
This is seen when working class people see themselves as temporary.
Exactly, but cut philosophy, you shouldn't stop there, my dear brother. The middle class in general was invented for that very purpose. It's not that the middle class has always existed as an idea, and now more and more workers are being motivated to identify with it. From the get-go, it was invented. It's not based in material reality, except, I guess, for the petit bourgeois.
Entrepreneurs on the grind rather than sellers of labor power, and this is exploited by various companies. Consider, for instance, Uber, which has utilized the slogan, "Be your own boss." Although Uber drivers are gig workers who are materially generating profit for Uber, Uber tries to convince them that they are in fact self-employed bosses. Thus, while offering them terrible working conditions, they sell them the promise of being petty bourgeois.
This is like super fucking hard cooking because they don't give a shit anymore, man. Because for the profit motive to keep increasing even through these times of crisis, you got to remove absolutely any base for worker stability, any sort of protection that a worker might have. They will continue to expand and expand and expand. But the more important thing about this video, it will continue to expand and also hurt small business owners, ironically. Like the difference between regular working class people getting shafted by capitalism, I will always feel bad, and obviously we all should feel bad because they are the actual backbone of civilization, labor. I will not feel bad when I see all these small businesses go out of business. Literally, go f yourself. You did this to yourself as a class. Even though I'm going back to what I said previously, we need pitches toward so-called middle-class people. We need to convince people who might be wealthy but not corporate parasites, etc., etc. That's why I made my whole last video, Rich Socialists, where I do posit the unironic pitch that even if you're making 1 to 2 mil a year as a professional employee, as some sort of engineer, some sort of fucking stockbroker or whatever the fuck, you can also be a comrade. You absolutely can be if you have a little bit of class consciousness, because even when you're generating crazy amounts of money, most likely you would have been generating more money if your boss wasn't skimming everything on top, because that's how they make the real fucking bucks. From you and a bunch of other dudes, other chuds that are getting over. It's not about how much income you have. It is your position in the actual fucking hierarchy. And I unironically will always stand behind this. I don't give a fuck how much you make. Dude, go get that fucking bread. Make 5 mil a year. God bless. But please try to do that without the exploitation of other people. And while certain very small segments of society might be privileged enough or lucky enough to get into that point, us as socialists should also pitch to them, because unironically they have capital and our movements need money in order to grow. That's the fucking unfortunate reality of capitalism. That's just fact. That does not mean we work with capitalists, but we do work with professional managerial class dudes that have more class consciousness aligned with the working people than they do with their bosses or their position in, the imperial core, etc., etc. But these specifically American petit bourgeois reactionary dogs cannot be talked to. Not only because they're foaming at the mouth, but because you're so fucking stupid to have basic human rationality for you to have class consciousness. I broke a random guy's brain the fucking knee a few weeks ago trying to explain that Steph Curry is working class because the value he generates for the Warriors is way more than his salary, no matter how high the salary is. Absolutely. And that specific pitch works really well, and why I think it should be encouraged when it comes to socialist agitation. You know why? Because it directly combats the I am a temporarily disadvantaged billionaire perspective. Because socialists tell you that, dude, I hope you do as well as you can in capitalism. Even if you're doing very well, you're going to be doing as well, if not better, in an actual socialized community, also known as lower stages of socialism, post-revolution, or, through electoral success or through anarchist, through whatever sect you belong to. Because it fucking works. You don't have to tell them, yo, you went to study finance for so many years and now you're making a decent buck, and that means we're going to take you out behind the shed and shoot you. Give a little bit of that money, get us some AKs, and you'll be fucking good. I'm joking, obviously, but am I? Without Engels, we would not have this ideology. The privileged and rich boy of industrialists, of the peak of like Amazon 2 of his time. Thank you very much, Cock Philosophy, for the video. I agree with almost all of it, except the notion that the middle class has always existed, as if it kind of spawned out of thin air. But hey, that's why we need to adapt our reality as a sort of ideology, as a sort of movement, and adapt to modern
A new
times.
child soldier.
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
professional
subscriber.
managerial class might not have existed back in the day, but it does now. And what position it finds itself in the eternal class war, just like the petit bourgeois to an extent, will be defined by how we speak to them or how we do not speak.
Subscribe or Baby Yoda gets it. Subscribe or Baby Yoda gets it. Do you want Baby Yoda to live? You must subscribe.